The gunshot shattered the morning stillness, and Beatrice Morgan dropped to her knees behind the water trough as splinters exploded from the fence post beside her head. She pressed herself flat against the rough wooden planks, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The ranch house stood 40 yards away, close enough to see the curtains her mother had sewn fluttering in the broken window, far enough that it might as well have been miles. Another shot rang out, this one kicking up dirt 3 feet to her left. They were playing with her, enjoying the fear they could smell on her like wolves circling wounded prey. "Come on out, Miss Morgan," a voice called from somewhere near the barn. She recognized it as belonging to Frank Holloway, the foreman who worked for Samuel Brennan, the cattle baron who had been trying to buy her land for the past 6 months. "Mr. Brennan just wants to talk business. No need for all this unpleasantness." Beatrice pressed her forehead against the trough, tasting dust and terror. Business. As if burning her hay stores and poisoning her creek could be called business. As if the bullet that had killed her father 3 weeks ago had been anything but murder, even though the sheriff had ruled it an accident. A tragic mishap during a hunting trip, they said. Never mind that her father had been walking from the barn to the house in broad daylight when he fell. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, turning the ground into a griddle and the air into something thick and hostile. It was September of 1878, and Gila City had grown from a mining camp into a proper town over the past decade. But that growth had brought men like Brennan, men who saw land and water as things to be taken rather than earned. Her father had built this ranch from nothing, survived Apache raids and drought, and everything else this hard country could throw at a man, only to be cut down by someone's hired gun. "Your pa was a reasonable man when he needed to be," Holloway called again. "Shame you did not inherit that quality." Beatrice closed her eyes, searching for the anger that had sustained her through these past weeks. She found it burning beneath the fear, hot and righteous. This land was hers. Every acre had been paid for with her father's sweat and blood, and before that, her mother's tears. Sarah Morgan had died bringing Beatrice into this world 23 years ago, and sometimes Beatrice wondered if her mother watched from wherever the dead went, proud or disappointed at how her daughter had turned out. She was not beautiful, not in the way men seem to want. Her face was too angular, her hands too rough from work. Her hair was the color of weathered oak, always escaping whatever pins she used to tame it. But she could shoot straight, ride hard, and she knew cattle almost as well as her father had. The ranch hands had respected her father, but after he died, they had drifted away one by one. Some took jobs with Brennan. Others just moved on, unwilling to work for a woman, unwilling to stand against Brennan's growing power. A third shot punched through the water trough, and suddenly water was gushing out, soaking her dress and turning the ground to mud. Beatrice swore and scrambled to her feet, running in a crouch toward a pile of lumber near what was supposed to become a new stable. She made it halfway before a bullet cracked past her ear, close enough that she felt the heat of its passage. She dove behind the lumber and lay gasping, her dress plastered to her body, her hair hanging in wet ropes. She had a rifle in the house, her father's Winchester, but she might as well wish for the moon. Between her and that rifle stood 3 of Brennan's men, maybe more. Holloway and at least 2 others, from the different positions the shots had come from. "Last chance, Miss Morgan," Holloway said, and now his voice was closer, maybe 20 yards away. "Mr. Brennan's made you a fair offer. $5,000 for the land and buildings. That is more money than you will see in 10 lifetimes. Take it and go back east where women belong." "Go to hell," Beatrice shouted, and immediately regretted giving away her position. A bullet slammed into the lumber pile, then another, and another. They were not trying to hit her anymore, just keeping her pinned while someone circled around. She had maybe a minute before they had her trapped with no escape. She looked around desperately, searching for anything that could help. A shovel leaned against the lumber pile, useless against guns. Her hands were empty except for the bucket she had been carrying to water the chickens, back when the morning had been normal and the future had seemed like something she could face. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast from the direction of the main road. For a moment hope flared in her chest. Maybe someone from town had heard the shots. Maybe the sheriff had finally decided to do his job. But the hope died as quickly as it came. The sheriff was in Brennan's pocket. Everyone knew it. Whoever was coming, it probably meant more trouble, not less. "Hold your fire," Holloway called out, and the shooting stopped. Beatrice risked a glance around the lumber pile. A lone rider was approaching at a gallop, sitting easy in the saddle despite the speed. Even from a distance she could tell he was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty black hat and a gun belt slung low on his hips. He reined in his horse about 30 yards from where Holloway and his men stood near the barn, and for a moment nobody moved. "Morning, gentlemen," the stranger said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. It was a deep voice, steady and calm, the kind of voice that made you think of deep water. "Seems like you are having some trouble with your aim. 3 men shooting at one unarmed woman and you have not hit her yet. That is embarrassing." "This is private business," Holloway said, stepping forward with his rifle leveled. "Keep riding if you know what is good for you." The stranger sat motionless on his horse, and Beatrice realized he was studying the scene with an intensity that made her shiver despite the heat. He looked at the burned hay shed, the broken windows in the house, the water still gushing from the punctured trough. Then his gaze swept across the yard until it found her crouched behind the lumber, and even from this distance she felt the impact of those eyes. "Looks to me like 3 hired guns trying to scare a woman off her own land," the stranger said. "That is not private business. That is the kind of thing that makes a man's breakfast sit heavy in his stomach." "I said ride on," Holloway growled, raising his rifle to his shoulder. What happened next happened so fast that Beatrice almost missed it. The stranger's hand moved, a blur of motion, and suddenly he had a rifle in his hands, pulled from a scabbard on his saddle. The sound of him levering a round into the chamber echoed across the yard like a crack of thunder. "You could try shooting me," the stranger said, and now his voice had gone cold and hard as January ice. "But before you do, you should know that I rode with the Texas Rangers for 5 years, and I have never missed a shot that mattered. The question you need to ask yourself is whether Samuel Brennan pays you enough to die for him." Holloway froze, and Beatrice could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. She had seen his kind before, men who were brave enough when they had the numbers and the advantage, but who turned cautious when the odds evened out. He lowered his rifle slowly, and the 2 men with him did the same. "Brennan will hear about this," Holloway said. "You are making a big mistake, stranger." "Would not be my first," the stranger replied. "Now I think you gentlemen should ride out, take the long way around, give the lady some peace." For a moment Beatrice thought Holloway might argue, might decide that 3 against 1 were still good enough odds. But something in the stranger's stillness, in the way he sat that horse like he had all the time in the world, made Holloway think better of it. He jerked his head toward his men, and they backed toward their horses, mounted up, and rode off toward the south, taking the long route back to Brennan's land like the stranger had suggested. The stranger watched them until they were out of sight. then dismounted in one smooth motion and led his horse toward where Beatrice still crouched behind the lumber. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, maybe 26 or 27, with a face that might have been handsome if it had not been so serious. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with concern. "You hurt, miss?" he asked, offering her a hand. Beatrice hesitated, then took it. His grip was strong and warm, calloused from hard work. He pulled her to her feet easily, and she found herself standing closer to him than she had intended, close enough to smell horse and leather and something else, something clean like soap or pine. "I am fine," she said, stepping back quickly. "Thank you for what you did. I thought they were going to kill me." "Maybe," the stranger said, studying the damage around the yard. "More likely they just wanted to scare you. Men like that, they usually work up to killing. Start with threats, move to property damage, see if they can break you without the mess of a murder investigation. You seem to know a lot about it. I have seen it before." He turned back to her, and something in his expression softened. "Name is Dominic Ortega. I am just passing through, or I was. Came up from Tucson looking for work. Heard in town that there might be ranches hiring." "Beatrice Morgan," she said automatically, then added, "And there is not any work here, Mr. Ortega. As you can see, I barely have a ranch left." Dominic looked around again, taking in the details she had been living with for weeks. The fence that needed mending. The barn door hanging crooked on its hinges where someone had tried to kick it in. The chicken coop torn apart, her hens long since scattered or killed. The vegetable garden her father had planted, now trampled and destroyed. "Seems to me you could use some help," he said quietly. "I cannot pay you," Beatrice said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I can barely pay for feed for the stock I have left. Those men, they work for Samuel Brennan. He owns the big ranch 5 miles east of here, and he wants my water rights, wants them bad enough to kill for them. My father died 3 weeks ago, and since then it has been one thing after another. The hands left. The sheriff will not help. Nobody in town will sell me supplies anymore. Brennan made sure of that. So you are fighting alone. I do not have a choice." She felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had cried herself dry in the days after her father's death, and she would not give Brennan's men the satisfaction of seeing her cry now. "This land is all I have. My father built it from nothing. My mother is buried here. If I give up, if I take Brennan's money and leave, then everything they worked for means nothing. I would rather die." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Then he said something that changed everything. "You do not have to fight alone anymore." Beatrice stared at him. "What?" "I said you do not have to fight alone." He settled his hat more firmly on his head, a gesture she would come to know well in the days ahead. "I will work for you. For room and board until you can afford to pay me. Help you fix this place up, help you stand against Brennan." "Why?" The word came out harsh, suspicious. "You do not know me. This is not your fight." "No, it is not," Dominic agreed. "But I rode through Gila City, saw how things are. Saw Brennan's men strutting around like they owned the place. Heard talk about how he has been squeezing out the small ranchers, taking what he wants. I do not like bullies, Miss Morgan. Never have. And I particularly do not like men who think they can use guns to take what a woman has every right to protect. You could get killed." "I could," he said simply. "But we all die sometime. Might as well be for something that matters." Beatrice wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to ride away while he still could. But the words would not come. Instead, she found herself nodding, accepting this impossible gift from a stranger who had no reason to help her, except that it was the right thing to do. "There is a spare room in the house," she heard herself say. "It is not much, but it is clean. And I can cook at least. We have some supplies left, enough for a few days if we are careful." "That will do fine," Dominic said. He looked toward the broken water trough, water still pooling on the ground. "First thing we should do is stop that leak. Then we can take stock of what else needs fixing." They worked together through the heat of the day, and Beatrice found herself watching Dominic when she thought he was not looking. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years of hard work, wasting no movement, no energy. When they rigged a patch for the water trough using canvas and tar, his hands were steady and sure. When they checked the barn and found 2 of her remaining cows missing, probably stolen during the night, his face went hard, but he did not waste time on anger. "How many head do you have left?" he asked. 23 cows, 5 steers, Beatrice said. The number made her want to weep. Her father had built the herd to nearly 200 before Brennan's campaign had begun. "And 1 bull, if he has not been stolen too. I have not seen him in 2 days." "We will look for him tomorrow," Dominic said. "For now, let us make sure the ones you have are secure. Do you have any hands left at all?" "No. The last one quit 4 days ago, said his wife did not want him working for me anymore." She did not add that the hand had looked ashamed, that he had been one of her father's oldest friends. Brennan's reach extended everywhere. They moved the cattle to a pasture closer to the house where they could be watched, then spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing the barn doors and patching the broken windows. Dominic worked without complaint, though Beatrice knew he must be exhausted from whatever traveling he had done before arriving. She caught him watching the horizon several times, his hand resting unconsciously on his rifle, and she realized he was standing guard even while he worked. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Beatrice led him inside the house. It was small but well built, 2 rooms downstairs and 2 up. Her father had added the 2nd story when Beatrice turned 16, giving her a proper bedroom instead of the loft where she had slept as a child. "I will make supper," she said, gesturing toward the spare room off the kitchen. "You can put your things in there." Dominic nodded and disappeared into the room with his saddlebags. Beatrice busied herself at the stove, grateful for something to do with her hands. She made beans and cornbread, stretching the supplies she had left. When Dominic emerged, he had washed the trail dust from his face and hands, and she could see him more clearly now in the lamplight. He was handsome, she decided, but in a hard way, like something that had been forged and tempered. There was a scar along his jaw, white against his tanned skin, and another on the back of his left hand. His hair was dark brown, almost black and long enough to brush his collar. When he caught her looking, she turned quickly back to the stove, feeling heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. They ate in silence at first, the awkwardness of strangers sharing a meal. But then Dominic asked about her father, and Beatrice found herself talking, telling stories about how he had come to Arizona, about the early days of the ranch. Dominic listened without interrupting, and she was grateful for that, for someone who understood that sometimes you just needed to talk to remember. "He sounds like he was a good man," Dominic said when she finally wound down. "He was. He deserved better than to be shot in the back by one of Brennan's hired guns." "You are sure it was Brennan's doing? Who else?" Beatrice pushed her plate away, appetite gone. The timing was too convenient. "Brennan had just made his last offer, and my father had just told him in no uncertain terms what he could do with it. 3 days later, he was dead. The sheriff called it an accident, but there were no other hunters in the area. No one heard any shots except the one that killed him." Dominic nodded slowly. "And since then, Brennan has been trying to force you out. Every way he can think of. First it was just refusing to do business with me. Then his men started showing up making threats. Then they burned the hay shed, poisoned the creek. I had to move the cattle to a different water source, lost a week of grazing time. Every day it is something new, something worse. She met his eyes across the table. You should know what you are getting into, Mr. Ortega. This is not going to get better before it gets worse. Brennan is not going to stop just because I have help now. I know, Dominic said, and you should call me Dominic if we are going to be working together. Beatrice, she said, then added, or B. My father called me B. Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but real. An understanding, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Beatrice felt it settle around her like a warm blanket, and for the first time in weeks, she did not feel quite so alone. They talked a while longer, and Beatrice learned more about the man who had appeared out of nowhere to help her. He had been born in Texas, the son of a Mexican father and an Irish mother, which explained his coloring and his unusual name. He had joined the Rangers at 20, chasing Comanche raiders and cattle thieves across the rough country between the Rio Grande and San Antonio. He had left the Rangers 2 years ago after something he would not talk about and had been drifting since then, working cattle ranches and mining camps, never staying long in one place. Why not? Beatrice asked. You obviously know what you are doing. You could have a steady job anywhere. Dominic was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I guess I have been looking for something, he said finally. I just have not known what it was. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Beatrice was not sure she understood. She stood and began clearing the dishes, needing to move, to do something with the strange energy that had filled the room. You should get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. So will you, Dominic said, but he stood and moved toward his room. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at her. Thank you for the meal, Beatrice, and for trusting me enough to let me stay. Thank you for staying, she replied, and meant it more than she could say. After he had gone, Beatrice banked the fire and climbed the stairs to her own room. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling, and thought about the strange turn her day had taken. This morning she had been alone, desperate, out of options. Now she had help, unexpected and unexplained but real nonetheless. She thought about Dominic's gray eyes, the steadiness in his voice, the way he had stood up to Holloway and his men without hesitation. She thought about the scar on his jaw and wondered how he had gotten it. She thought about a lot of things, and when she finally slept, it was deeper and more peaceful than any sleep she had known since her father died. The next week passed in a blur of hard work. Dominic proved to be everything he had promised and more. He could fix a fence line faster than any hand her father had ever hired. He could read cattle sign like other men read newspapers, tracking down strays that had been scattered during Brennan's raids. He found the bull 3 miles away, trapped in a ravine, and managed to get him out with rope and patience, and no small amount of risk to himself. But more than his skills, it was his presence that made the difference. Beatrice had not realized how much fear had been weighing on her until it began to lift. With Dominic there, rifle always close at hand, standing watch while she worked, she could breathe again. She could think about more than just survival, about rebuilding, about the future. They fell into a routine. Up before dawn to tend the stock, working through the morning on whatever project was most urgent. Beatrice cooked while Dominic stood guard, and they ate their meals together, talking about the ranch, about what needed to be done. In the evenings, Dominic taught her to shoot better, to really shoot, not just point a gun and hope for the best. You have the basics, he told her after the 3rd evening of practice, but you are squeezing the trigger instead of pulling it smooth, like this. He stood behind her, his arms coming around to adjust her grip on the rifle, and Beatrice felt her breath catch in her throat. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, smell leather and soap, and something that was just him. His hands on hers were gentle but firm, guiding without forcing. "Now try," he said, his voice close to her ear. Beatrice fired, and the bottle they had set up as a target exploded into fragments. She turned, grinning with triumph, and found herself looking up into Dominic's face, only inches away. His gray eyes had darkened, and for a moment she thought he was going to kiss her. For a moment she wanted him to, but he stepped back, clearing his throat, and the moment passed. "Good shot," he said, his voice rough. "You will be able to take care of yourself soon enough." Beatrice nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and they went inside without saying anything more. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been approached if not crossed. Beatrice found herself aware of Dominic in new ways. The way he moved, all controlled power. The rare smile that transformed his serious face. The sound of his voice in the morning, low and warm, saying her name. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable, and she wondered what he was thinking. She told herself it was foolish, this awareness, this warmth that bloomed in her chest when he was near. He was just helping her, just doing what he thought was right. When the trouble with Brennan was over, when she had her ranch secure again, he would move on like he had said he always did. There was no point in letting herself feel more than gratitude. But the heart has its own logic, and Beatrice's heart was not listening to reason. 2 weeks after Dominic arrived, Brennan made his next move. They were working on repairing the stable, sawing boards and hammering nails, when a group of riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Dominic saw them first, his hand dropping to his rifle even as he called to Beatrice. "Inside," he said. "Now, how many?" Beatrice asked, already moving toward the house. 6, maybe more behind the ridge. They made it inside, and Dominic took up a position by the window while Beatrice grabbed her father's Winchester from where it hung over the mantel. Her hands were shaking, and she forced herself to take a deep breath. This was it, the confrontation she had been dreading. The riders came down slowly, making no attempt at stealth. They wanted to be seen, wanted the intimidation of numbers. Beatrice recognized Holloway at the front, and beside him was Samuel Brennan himself, sitting his horse like he owned everything he could see. Brennan was in his 50s, tall and heavy-set, with iron-gray hair and a face that might have been pleasant if it had not been so cold. He dressed well, better than most ranchers, in a suit coat and vest, even in the Arizona heat. He was the kind of man who used his wealth like a weapon, buying influence and loyalty, crushing anyone who stood in his way. They reined in about 30 yards from the house, and Brennan dismounted, gesturing for his men to stay mounted. He walked forward alone, stopping just outside easy rifle range. "Miss Morgan," he called out, "I think it is time we had a conversation. A real one, not with guns and lawyers between us." "I have nothing to say to you," Beatrice called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "I think you do." Brennan smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "I am going to be straight with you because I believe in being fair. Your father was a stubborn man, and that stubbornness got him killed. I do not want the same thing to happen to you." "Is that a threat?" Dominic said, his voice cutting across the yard like a knife. Brennan's eyes shifted to him, and something ugly flickered across his face. "And who might you be?" "Someone who does not like men who threaten women," Dominic said. "You have said your piece. Now you can ride out." "I am offering Miss Morgan a way out," Brennan said, his voice hardening. $10,000 for her land and stock. That is double my original offer. More than fair, considering the circumstances. Considering that you have destroyed half my ranch trying to force me to sell. Beatrice stepped closer to the window, making sure Brennan could see her. Considering that you had my father murdered. No amount of money is fair, Mr. Brennan. This land is not for sale, not now, not ever. Your father's death was a tragedy, Brennan said, and he sounded almost sincere. But it was an accident. The sheriff said so. As for your ranch, well, accidents happen, fires start, animals get spooked. These things are unfortunate, but they are not my fault. Liar, Beatrice spat. Everyone knows what you are doing. The whole town knows. What I am doing is building an empire, Brennan said, and now the veneer of politeness fell away, revealing the steel beneath. This territory is going to be a state soon, and when it does, the men who control the land will control everything else. Your father understood that, even if he was too proud to admit it. But you, Miss Morgan, you are just a girl playing at running a ranch. You cannot win this fight. Take my offer while it still stands. And if I do not, Brennan's smile was cold as January, then I will take what I want anyway, and you will get nothing. Your stock will disappear. Your fences will come down. Maybe your barn will catch fire with you inside it. These things happen in the wild country, Miss Morgan. Terrible things, but not criminal. Not if the right people say they were accidents. That is enough, Dominic said, and there was something in his voice that made Brennan take a step back. You have made your threats. Now you can leave, before this conversation becomes something you regret. Brennan looked at Dominic for a long moment, and Beatrice saw recognition dawn in his eyes. I know you, he said slowly. You are the ranger who killed those men in Uvalde. The Mexican bastard who thought he was above the law. Dominic's face could have been carved from stone. I was following the law. They were the ones who thought they were above it. They were the mayor's sons, Brennan said. Important men, and you shot them down like dogs. They raped a girl and murdered her family, Dominic said, each word hard and precise. They thought their father's position would protect them. They were wrong. The law says every man is equal, Mr. Brennan, even the sons of mayors. Even cattle barons who think they can buy and kill their way to whatever they want. The Rangers did not see it that way, Brennan said. I heard you had to leave Texas to avoid being arrested yourself. I left because staying would have meant more killing, Dominic said. The mayor wanted revenge, and he had the money to hire men who did not care about guilt or innocence. So I left. But I did not run, Brennan. I am still here, still standing. And I am telling you now, if you or your men come near this ranch again, if you threaten Miss Morgan again, I will make you regret it. Brennan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Big words from one man. I have 20 men working for me, and I can hire 20 more if I need them. What can you do against those numbers? I guess you will find out if you keep pushing, Dominic said. For a moment, Beatrice thought Brennan would do something rash, would order his men to attack. But something in Dominic's absolute stillness, his utter lack of fear, made Brennan hesitate. He was a bully, and bullies could be brave when they faced no real threat. But Dominic was a threat, and Brennan could sense it. You are making a mistake, Brennan said, backing toward his horse. Both of you. But I am a patient man. I can wait. He mounted up, looked down at them both. Winter is coming, Miss Morgan. Long, cold nights. Hard to keep watch all night every night. Hard to protect your stock when you are asleep. You should think about that when you are lying in your bed wondering when the next fire will start. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following, and Beatrice let out a breath she had not known she was holding. That went well, she said, trying for humor and failing. Dominic turned to look at her, and she was startled by the intensity in his eyes. He is going to escalate now. He will see me as a challenge to his authority, something to be crushed. Things are going to get worse before they get better. Then maybe you should leave, Beatrice said, even though the thought of him leaving made her chest ache. What he said about Texas, about you having to run. I do not want you to have to run again because of me. I am not running, Dominic said. And what happened in Texas, that was about justice, not murder. Those men deserved what they got, and I would do it again. The Rangers understood that, even if they could not protect me from political revenge. That is why they let me go instead of arresting me. Still, Beatrice said, you do not owe me this. You do not have to stay. Dominic crossed the room in 3 strides and took her shoulders gently, making her look at him. Yes, I do, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion she did not understand. I do not know why, Beatrice, but I do. From the moment I rode up and saw you behind that lumber pile, saw you trying to stand alone against men who wanted to hurt you, I knew. This is where I am supposed to be. This is what I have been looking for. Beatrice stared up at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. Dominic, she whispered, not knowing what else to say. He let her go, stepping back as if he had said too much. We need to prepare, he said, his voice normal again, controlled. Brennan will wait a few days, let the fear build, then he will hit us. We need to be ready. They spent the next 3 days fortifying the ranch as best they could. Dominic showed her how to set up simple alarms, strings of cans that would rattle if someone tried to sneak up in the dark. They moved the cattle even closer to the house, into a corral they built from salvaged lumber. They took turns standing watch through the night, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, never both sleeping at the same time. It was exhausting, grinding work, and Beatrice felt herself fraying at the edges. But every time she thought about giving up, about taking Brennan's money and running, she would look at Dominic standing guard, rifle in his hands, and she would find the strength to keep going. On the 4th night, they came. Beatrice was on watch, sitting by the window with her rifle across her lap, when she heard the cans rattle near the barn. She was on her feet instantly, calling for Dominic even as she moved to get a better angle. Dominic appeared beside her in seconds, still pulling on his gun belt. How many? I do not know. At least 2 near the barn. They watched in silence, and then Beatrice saw movement, shadows detaching themselves from the darkness. 3 men, creeping toward the barn with torches in their hands. They were going to burn it with her cattle inside. No, Beatrice breathed, raising her rifle. Wait, Dominic said, his hand on her arm. Let them get closer. We need to make sure they know we are serious. The men reached the barn and began spreading what looked like oil along the walls. One of them struck a match and Dominic fired. The shot cracked through the night like thunder and the match went flying from the man's hand. All 3 men dove for cover, shouting in surprise and fear. That was your warning, Dominic called out. The next shots will not miss. Leave now, or we will put you down like the animals you are. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the men shouted back. Brennan is not going to let this stand. You are just making it worse for yourselves. Then maybe Brennan should come himself instead of sending cowards to do his dirty work, Beatrice shouted, surprised by the fury in her own voice. Tell him if he wants my land, he can face me himself. Tell him I am not afraid of him anymore. Another long silence, and then the men were running, disappearing into the darkness toward where they must have left their horses. Beatrice and Dominic waited, listening, until they heard hoofbeats fading into the distance. That was reckless, Dominic said, but he was almost smiling. Challenging him like that. I meant it, Beatrice said. I am tired of being afraid, tired of hiding. If he wants a fight, I will give him one. Dominic looked at her, and in the lamplight his eyes were warm. You are braver than you know, Beatrice Morgan. I am scared to death, she admitted. But you make me feel like I can do this, like I am not alone. You are not, Dominic said softly. Not anymore. They stood there in the darkness, close enough to touch, and Beatrice felt something shift between them again. It was more than gratitude now, more than partnership. It was something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. "Dominic," she said, then stopped, not knowing how to put words to what she was feeling. But Dominic seemed to understand. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was rough against her cheek, warm and solid and real. "I should not," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is not the time. You are vulnerable, and I am here to protect you, not take advantage." "You are not taking advantage," Beatrice said, covering his hand with hers. "Dominic, I feel. I do not know how to say it, but when you are near, I feel like I can breathe again. Like the world is not quite so heavy. And when you look at me like you are looking at me now, I feel." She trailed off, embarrassed, but Dominic was smiling, really smiling, and it transformed his face from serious to something almost beautiful. "I feel it too," he said. "From that first day when I saw you behind that lumber pile, so fierce and so scared and so determined not to give up. I thought you were the bravest thing I had ever seen, and every day since you have proven me right." "I am not brave," Beatrice said. "I am terrified." "Bravery is not about not being scared," Dominic said. "It is about being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. You are brave, Beatrice. Braver than most men I have known." Then he was kissing her, gentle and careful, and Beatrice felt the world fall away. There was only this moment, only the warmth of his mouth on hers, the strength of his arms as they came around her. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the fear and loneliness and desperate hope that had been building inside her. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "I did not come here looking for this," he said, "but I am not sorry I found it." "Neither am I," Beatrice whispered. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other, and for a little while the fear and the danger seemed very far away. But reality returned soon enough, as it always did. They had challenged Brennan, thrown down the gauntlet in a way that could not be ignored. Whatever came next would be worse than anything that had come before. But at least they would face it together. The sun rose on a new day, and with it came a strange calm. No riders appeared on the ridge. No shots were fired. It was as if Brennan had decided to give them time to think about what they had done, to let their own imaginations work against them. But Beatrice found that fear had loosened its grip on her. She had Dominic beside her, and she had her own determination, and together they were stronger than she had ever been alone. They worked through the day, finishing the repairs to the barn, moving the oiled boards they had found and replacing them with clean lumber. They checked the stock and found them all accounted for. It was almost like a normal day on a normal ranch, except for the rifle Dominic kept always within reach, and the way they both kept watching the horizon. That evening, after supper, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Dominic had his arm around her shoulders, and Beatrice leaned into him, savoring the simple comfort of being close. "Tell me about your family," she said. "You know everything about mine, but I barely know anything about yours." Dominic was quiet for a moment, and Beatrice thought he might not answer, but then he began to speak, his voice low and thoughtful. "My father was a vaquero, one of the best horsemen in Texas. He came north from Mexico when he was young, looking for work. He met my mother at a dance in San Antonio. She was the daughter of Irish immigrants, and her family did not approve. They thought she was marrying beneath her. But she loved him and he loved her, and they did not care what anyone else thought." "That sounds romantic," Beatrice said. "It was, until the reality set in. They had a hard life. My father worked himself to the bone, trying to prove he was good enough, trying to make enough money to give my mother the life her family thought she deserved. But it was never enough. She died when I was 12, worn out from hard work and harder living. My father lasted 2 more years, then followed her. I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything else. I am sorry, Beatrice said, squeezing his hand. I joined the Rangers because I did not know what else to do, Dominic continued. I was good at it, good at tracking, good at fighting. But I never liked the killing. Never got used to it, no matter how many times I had to do it. When those mayor's sons did what they did, when everyone wanted to look the other way because of who their father was, I could not. I arrested them, testified against them. When they were found guilty and hanged, their father swore revenge. He hired guns to kill me, and the Rangers could not protect me without starting a range war, so I left. That was not running away, Beatrice said fiercely. That was being smart. Maybe, Dominic said, but it felt like running. I have been drifting ever since, looking for something but never finding it, until I rode into Gila City and heard shots being fired at a ranch outside of town. I am glad you came, Beatrice said. So glad. So am I, Dominic said and kissed her again, slow and sweet in the fading light. They stayed on the porch until full dark, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way people do when they are falling in love. Beatrice told him about her childhood, about the loneliness of being an only child on an isolated ranch, about the books she had read and the dreams she had dreamed. Dominic told her about Texas, about the vast plains and the fierce storms, about the Rangers and the men he had ridden with. When they finally went inside, it felt natural for Dominic to follow her up the stairs instead of going to his room off the kitchen. They stood outside her bedroom door, and Beatrice felt her heart pounding, not with fear but with anticipation. I do not want to push you, Dominic said. If you are not ready, if this is too fast. It probably is too fast, Beatrice said. But I do not care. I have spent so long being careful, being proper, doing what people expected. I am tired of it, Dominic. I want to live, and I want to live with you. She took his hand and led him into her room, closing the door behind them. What happened next was tender and awkward and wonderful. 2 people finding each other in the darkness, learning the language of touch and breath and whispered words. Beatrice had never been with a man before, and Dominic was patient, gentle, making sure she was comfortable, making sure she wanted this. And she did want it, wanted him with an intensity that surprised her. She gave herself to him freely, holding nothing back, and in return he gave her everything, his strength and his tenderness and his heart. When they finally lay tangled together in her narrow bed, both breathing hard, both smiling in the darkness, Beatrice felt complete in a way she never had before. I love you, Dominic whispered against her hair. I know it is too soon to say it, too fast, but I do. I love you, Beatrice Morgan. I love you too, Beatrice said, and felt tears slide down her cheeks, happy tears this time. I love you so much it scares me. Do not be scared, Dominic said, holding her closer. Whatever happens, we will face it together. I promise you that. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for one night the world was perfect, but morning brought reality crashing back. They woke to the sound of horses, many horses, and shouts from the yard. Dominic was up instantly, pulling on his clothes, grabbing his rifle. Beatrice dressed quickly, her hands shaking, and followed him downstairs. Through the window, they could see at least a dozen riders, and at their head was Samuel Brennan. But there was someone else with him, someone wearing a badge. The sheriff, a man named Tom Wickham, who everyone knew was in Brennan's pocket. Miss Morgan, Wickham called out. I need you to come out here, both of you. What is this about? Beatrice called back, her rifle in her hands. I have a warrant for the arrest of Dominic Ortega, Wickham said. He is wanted in Texas for the murder of James and Robert Hollister. Come out peacefully and nobody needs to get hurt." Beatrice felt ice flood her veins. She looked at Dominic, saw his face had gone hard and expressionless. "This is Brennan's doing," she said. "He found out who you are and called in a favor." "Probably," Dominic agreed, "but it does not matter. That warrant is real enough, even if the charges are not. If I run, they will use it as an excuse to burn you out. They will say I was a criminal and you were harboring me." "So what do we do?" Dominic looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that terrified her. "I go with them," he said. "Peacefully? Let them take me back to Texas. Once I am gone, Brennan will not have an excuse to hurt you. You can sell the ranch, take his money, start over somewhere safe." "No," Beatrice said. "Absolutely not. I am not letting them take you, and I am not selling my ranch. We fight." "Beatrice, there are 12 men out there. We cannot win." "Then we die trying," Beatrice said fiercely. "Dominic, you taught me to be brave. You showed me how to stand up for what is mine. Well, you are mine now, and I am not giving you up. Not to Brennan, not to some corrupt sheriff, not to anyone." Dominic stared at her, and she saw emotions chase across his face too fast to name. Then he was kissing her, hard and desperate, and when he pulled back his eyes were bright. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met," he said, but he was smiling. "All right, we fight, but we do it smart. We need help, allies. Is there anyone in town who would stand with you against Brennan?" Beatrice thought hard. Most of the town was either working for Brennan or too scared of him to act, but there were a very few, who might be brave enough or angry enough to help. "Doc Henley," she said. "The physician. He treated my father after he was shot, and he told me privately that he did not believe it was an accident. He is too old to fight, but he has influence. People trust him. And there is Mary Chen, who runs the general store with her husband. They are the only ones who will still sell to me, even though Brennan threatened them. And maybe a few others, small ranchers who have been pushed around by Brennan but have not given up yet." "That might be enough," Dominic said. "If we can get them to testify about what Brennan has been doing, if we can show that this arrest is just Brennan using the law for his own purposes, we might be able to turn public opinion. Make it too costly for Brennan to keep pushing." "We will not make it to town," Beatrice said, gesturing at the men outside. "They will arrest you the moment we step outside." "Not if we go out the back," Dominic said. "There is a wash that runs behind the house, right? It has cover, brush, and rocks. If we can make it there, we can work our way around to the road, get to town before they realize we are gone." It was a desperate plan, but desperate was all they had. Beatrice nodded, and they moved quickly, gathering what they needed: rifles, ammunition, water. Dominic wrote a quick note and left it on the table in case they did not make it. Then they slipped out the back door, moving fast and low, using the house to shield them from view. The wash was 100 yards away, and every step felt like a mile. Beatrice expected at any moment to hear a shout, a shot, but they made it to the brush and dropped into the cover of the gully behind them. They heard Wickham calling out again, growing impatient. "Last chance, Ortega. Come out or we are coming in." Dominic and Beatrice did not wait to hear more. They moved along the wash, bent double, heading east toward where the wash curved around toward the main road. It was rough going, the ground uneven and covered in thorny brush that tore at their clothes. But they kept moving, driven by fear and determination in equal measure. They were nearly to the road when they heard it. A shout from back at the house, and then the crash of a door being kicked in. Brennan's men had lost patience. "Run," Dominic said, and they did, scrambling up out of the wash and onto the road. Dominic's horse was still in the barn back at the ranch, but there was no way to get to him. They would have to make it to town on foot, 5 miles of exposed road with angry men behind them. They had gone maybe a mile when they heard hoofbeats. Dominic pulled Beatrice off the road, into the cover of some rocks, and they waited, rifles ready. But when the rider came into view, Beatrice felt relief flood through her. It was not one of Brennan's men. It was old Joe Sampson, a neighboring rancher who had been pushed off his land 2 years ago and now worked as a handyman in town. "Joe," Beatrice called, stepping out into the road. Joe reined in his mule, his weathered face creasing with surprise. "Beatrice, what in blazes are you doing out here on foot? And is that Dominic Ortega with you? We need help," Beatrice said quickly. "Brennan is trying to arrest Dominic on false charges. We need to get to town, talk to Doc Henley and anyone else who will listen. Can you help us?" Joe looked back toward where Beatrice's ranch lay, then at the two of them, dusty and desperate and armed. Then he nodded. "Get on. This mule is not fast, but he is steady. I will get you to town." They climbed on, Beatrice behind Joe and Dominic behind her, and the mule plodded forward at a pace that felt agonizingly slow but was better than walking. Behind them, they could hear shouts and more hoofbeats. Brennan's men had found their trail. "Hang on," Joe said, and kicked the mule into a trot. "We will make it." They did, but just barely. They were entering the outskirts of Gila City when the first of Brennan's men came thundering up behind them. But now they were in town, with people watching from doorways and windows, and that changed everything. Brennan's men could not just shoot them down in the street, not with witnesses. Dominic jumped down and helped Beatrice off, then turned to Joe. "Thank you. You might have just saved our lives." "Your pa was a good man, Beatrice," Joe said, "and I do not like seeing bullies win. Now go. Doc Henley's office is 2 streets over." They ran, pushing through the growing crowd of townspeople who had come out to see what the commotion was about. Behind them, Brennan and Wickham were dismounting, shouting for people to get out of the way. But the crowd was slow to move, whether from curiosity or quiet rebellion, and it gave Beatrice and Dominic the time they needed. They burst into Doc Henley's office, startling the old physician who was grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. He looked up, saw them, and his eyes widened. "Beatrice, what is wrong?" "Everything," Beatrice gasped out. "Doc, I need your help. Brennan is trying to arrest Dominic on false charges, and if he succeeds, he will run me off my land. I need you to tell people what you told me, about my father's death, about how it was not an accident." Doc Henley looked from her to Dominic, then to the window where they could see Brennan and Wickham pushing through the crowd. He was quiet for a long moment, and Beatrice felt her heart sink. He was going to refuse. He was too old, too cautious, too afraid of what Brennan might do. But then Doc Henley set down his mortar and pestle, took off his apron and walked to the door. He opened it and stepped out onto the porch, and his voice, when he spoke, was loud enough to carry across the street. "Sheriff Wickham," he said, "before you go arresting anyone, I think the people of this town deserve to know the truth about what has been happening out at the Morgan Ranch." Wickham stopped, looked uncertain. Brennan's face went dark with anger. But the crowd was listening now, pressing closer, and Doc Henley was one of the most respected men in Gila City. People listened when he spoke. "The truth is," Doc Henley continued, "that John Morgan was murdered. I examined his body, and the wound was not consistent with a hunting accident. He was shot from behind, at close range, with a large caliber rifle. That is an execution, not an accident. I told Sheriff Wickham this at the time, but he chose to ignore it." A murmur went through the crowd, surprise and anger mixing together. Wickham shifted uncomfortably, his hand dropping to his gun. "That is a serious accusation, Doc," he said. "You should be careful about what you say." "I am saying what I should have said weeks ago," Doc Henley replied. And I am not the only one who knows what Brennan has been doing. Every small rancher in this valley has been pushed, threatened, driven out. Brennan wants to build an empire, and he does not care who he has to destroy to do it. That is a lie, Brennan said, stepping forward. I am a legitimate businessman. If people cannot make their ranches work, that is not my fault. It is when you are burning their hay and poisoning their water, a new voice said, and Beatrice turned to see Mary Chen pushing through the crowd. Everyone knows what you are doing, Brennan. We are just too scared to say it. Well, I am not scared anymore. You threatened my husband and me, told us that if we kept selling supplies to Beatrice, you would burn our store. We have that threat in writing, signed by your foreman Frank Holloway. Another murmur, louder this time. People were looking at Brennan now with suspicion, with anger. The careful facade he had built, the image of a respectable businessman, was cracking. This is ridiculous, Brennan said, but there was a note of desperation in his voice now. Wickham, arrest these people for slander. I do not think so, Wickham said slowly, and Beatrice was shocked to see him step away from Brennan. I am the law in this town, Brennan, not your hired gun. If what these people are saying is true, if you have been threatening and killing to get what you want, then you are the one who should be arrested. You coward, Brennan hissed. I own you, Wickham. Do not forget that. You do not own me, Wickham said, and for the first time since Beatrice had known him, he sounded like a man with some backbone. You paid me to look the other way, and I did, and I am not proud of it, but this has gone too far. Miss Morgan's father is dead, and you are trying to use a false warrant to remove the one person who is helping her stand against you. I cannot be part of that. Then you are finished, Brennan said. In this town, in this territory, I will destroy you. Maybe, Wickham said. But at least I will be able to look at myself in the mirror. The crowd was swelling now, more people coming to see what the commotion was about. Beatrice saw other small ranchers, saw townspeople who had been hurt by Brennan's business practices. She saw anger in their faces, the kind of anger that had been building for a long time and was finally finding a voice. What about that warrant? Brennan demanded, turning to point at Dominic. He is a wanted man, a killer. Are you going to let him walk free? The warrant says he killed James and Robert Hollister, Wickham said. But it does not say why. I did some checking, sent some telegrams after you first told me about him. Those men were convicted of rape and murder. Dominic arrested them, and they were hanged by legal authority. Their father wanted revenge, but that does not make Dominic a criminal. He is still wanted, Brennan insisted. For questioning, not arrest, Wickham said. And only in Texas, which means I do not have jurisdiction. If Texas wants him, they can send someone to get him. Until then, he is free to go. Brennan's face went purple with rage. You will regret this, all of you. I am not done with this town with any of you. I think you are, a new voice said, and everyone turned to see Judge Harrison pushing through the crowd. He was a stern man, known for his fairness and his lack of patience for nonsense. I have been listening to this conversation, Mr. Brennan, and I do not like what I am hearing. Threats, intimidation, possible murder. I am ordering an investigation into your business practices, and until that investigation is complete, all land transactions in this valley are frozen. You will not be buying any more ranches, not until we know exactly how you acquired the ones you already have. It was a devastating blow, and everyone knew it. Brennan's whole strategy had been built on momentum, on fear, on the ability to keep pushing until people broke. But now that momentum had stopped, and without it, he was just another rancher, no more powerful than anyone else. This is not over, Brennan said, but the words sounded hollow. He looked around at the crowd, at the faces that had once shown fear and now showed only contempt, and something in him seemed to crumble. He turned and walked to his horse, mounted up, and rode away without another word. His men followed, including Holloway, who looked shaken and uncertain. When they were gone, the crowd erupted in conversation, everyone talking at once. Beatrice felt Dominic's arm come around her, and she leaned into him, suddenly exhausted. They had done it. Against all odds, they had stood up to Brennan and won. Doc Henley came down from his porch, smiling. "That was well done, Beatrice. Your father would have been proud." "Thank you," Beatrice said, and meant it. "Thank you for speaking up, for telling the truth." "I should have done it sooner," Doc Henley said. "I am ashamed that it took this long, but what matters is what we do from here. Brennan is down, but he is not out. He still has money, still has influence. You need to be careful." "We will be," Dominic said, "and we will be together." That makes all the difference. Over the next few weeks, the investigation into Brennan's activities gathered momentum. More and more people came forward with stories of intimidation and threats. Property that had been sold under duress was returned to its original owners. Holloway and 2 other men were arrested for attempted arson at Beatrice's ranch. They confessed to other crimes in exchange for reduced sentences, and their testimony implicated Brennan in everything from cattle theft to murder. Brennan himself fled before he could be arrested, abandoning his ranch and disappearing into Mexico. Rumors said he was trying to rebuild his empire down there, but most people did not care. He was gone, and that was enough. Beatrice's ranch slowly came back to life. With the threat removed, the hands who had left started coming back, shamefaced but willing to work. Neighbors who had been too scared to help before now pitched in, helping repair buildings and round up scattered stock. The burned hay shed was rebuilt, bigger and better than before. And through it all, Dominic was there, working beside her, planning for the future, making the ranch not just hers but theirs. 6 months after Brennan fled, on a warm spring morning in 1879, they were married in the little church in Gila City. Doc Henley gave Beatrice away, and Mary Chen stood up as her witness. Half the town came to the wedding and the other half sent presents. It was a joyous day, full of laughter and music and hope for the future. That night, alone in the ranch house that was now truly their home, Dominic held Beatrice close and whispered in her ear, "I love you, Mrs. Ortega. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Beatrice said. "You stood beside me when no man would help. You fought for me, for us, for our land. I could never have done this without you." "You would have found a way," Dominic said. "You are the strongest person I know, but I am glad I got to be here, got to fight beside you, got to love you." They made love that night with a tenderness that brought tears to Beatrice's eyes, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, she felt a peace she had never known. The hard times were not over. There would always be challenges, always be struggles. But they would face them together, and that made all the difference. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint care. They added to the herd, bought more land from neighbors who were ready to retire. They built a proper stable and a new barn. They planted trees around the house, cottonwoods and willows that provided shade in the brutal summer heat, and they built a family. Their first child, a son they named John after Beatrice's father, was born in 1880. He had Beatrice's brown hair and Dominic's gray eyes, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he owned both their hearts completely. 2 years later came a daughter, Sarah, named for Beatrice's mother. She had Dominic's dark coloring and a stubborn streak that made both her parents laugh and tear their hair out in equal measure. And 3 years after that came another son, Daniel, who was quiet and thoughtful, always watching, always thinking. The ranch that Beatrice had fought so hard to keep became a home filled with laughter and love. Dominic proved to be as good a father as he was a husband, patient and kind, teaching his children to ride and rope and shoot. He told them stories of his time with the Rangers, of the wild country and the wilder men who had lived there. He taught them to respect the land, to understand that it was not something to be owned but something to be cared for, passed down from one generation to the next. Beatrice thrived in ways she had never imagined. The scared, desperate woman who had crouched behind a lumber pile expecting to die became someone strong and sure, a pillar of the community. She served on the town council, helped establish a school, and was known throughout the territory as a woman who did not back down from a fight but who also knew when to extend mercy. Together, she and Dominic built something that lasted, something that mattered. Their love was the foundation, but on top of it, they built a life rich with purpose and meaning. The ranch became a place where neighbors knew they could come for help in hard times. The house became known for its hospitality, its doors always open to travelers and friends alike. On warm evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Beatrice and Dominic would sit on the porch together, watching the sun set over the land they had fought for and held on to. They would talk about the day, about the children, about plans for tomorrow. And sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, holding hands, needing no words to express what they felt. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked one evening when they were in their 40s, and the children were grown with families of their own. "Everything you gave up to stay here with me." Dominic turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes was as strong as it had been that first day when he had ridden into her life. "I did not give up anything," he said. "I found everything I had been looking for: purpose, home, love." "You gave me all of that, Beatrice. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave it to each other," Beatrice said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was so alone before you came, so scared. I thought I would lose everything." "Instead, you fought for it," Dominic said. "And I was lucky enough to fight beside you." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, lighting up the vast Arizona sky. The land around them was at peace, the cattle settled for the night, the horses quiet in the barn. In the distance, they could see lights from their son John's house, built on the eastern edge of the property. Sarah lived in town with her husband and 3 children, but she came to visit every week. Daniel had gone east to college but wrote letters faithfully, promising to come home when his studies were done. It was a good life, a life built on love and hard work and the refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. It was not perfect. There were still hard times, seasons of drought and sickness, losses that cut deep. But they faced them together, and that made even the hardest times bearable. As they grew older, they became the elders of the community, the ones the younger generation came to for advice and wisdom. They told the story of how they had met, of how Beatrice had stood alone against impossible odds, and how Dominic had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to say. The story became legend, embellished and improved with each telling, but at its heart remained the simple truth. A woman fighting for her land and the cowboy who stood beside her with his rifle, ready to face whatever came. When Dominic died in his 73rd year, peacefully in his sleep, Beatrice felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. She stood at his graveside, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she thought about all the years they had shared. All the laughter and the tears, the struggles and the triumphs, all the quiet moments and the dramatic ones. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, to the spirit of the man she had loved for more than 4 decades. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me." She lived another 5 years, long enough to see great-great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the ranch and the life she and Dominic had built would continue into the future. And when her time came, she faced it without fear, knowing that wherever Dominic had gone, she would find him again. They buried her next to him, on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together 50 years earlier. The stone said simply, Beatrice Morgan Ortega, beloved wife, mother, and fighter. And beside it, Dominic's stone said, Dominic Ortega, beloved husband, father, and protector. But the real monument to their love was not in stone. It was in the ranch that still bore the Morgan name, worked now by the 4th generation of their family. It was in the stories told around dinner tables and campfires, stories of bravery and love, and refusing to give up. It was in the values they had passed down, values of fairness and hard work, and standing up for what was right even when it cost you. Years after both of them were gone, a young woman came to visit the ranch, a historian writing a book about the early days of Arizona. She interviewed the family members, saw the old photographs, read the letters Dominic and Beatrice had written to each other during the brief times they were apart. What strikes me most, she said to John's grandson, who now ran the ranch, is how modern their love story feels, how equal they were. Most accounts from this era show the man as the hero and the woman as someone to be rescued, but your great-great-grandparents were partners in the truest sense. That is because they were, John's grandson said. My great-great-grandmother was not someone who needed rescuing. She was a fighter, strong and brave. My great-great-grandfather saw that, respected it. He did not come to save her. He came to stand beside her, to be her partner in every way. That is what made their love special. The historian nodded, understanding. And when her book was published, it told the story of Beatrice Morgan and Dominic Ortega not as a tale of rescue but as a story of partnership, of two strong people finding each other and building something that lasted. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not that Dominic had saved Beatrice, but that they had saved each other. She had given him a home and a purpose when he was drifting and lost. He had given her the strength to keep fighting when she thought she was alone. Together, they had created a love that was both fierce and tender, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. Their story became part of the fabric of Gila City, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But for those who knew them, for the family that carried on their legacy, it was not myth. It was truth, as real and solid as the land itself. The ranch still stands, more than 150 years after Beatrice's father first claimed it. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remains at its heart. The barn where Beatrice took shelter from Brennan's men has been rebuilt twice, but each time using timber from the original frame. The tree under which Beatrice and Dominic are buried is now massive, its branches spreading wide enough to shade a dozen people. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows just right, the current generation of the family swears they can hear whispers in that wind. Laughter, maybe, or the soft murmur of conversation. The ghosts of Beatrice and Dominic, still sitting on their porch, still watching over the land they loved, still together after all these years. It is a romantic notion, probably nothing more than imagination and wishful thinking. But it is nice to believe that love that's strong does not simply end, that somewhere, in some way, Beatrice and Dominic are still together, still partners, still fighting side by side for what matters. Because that is what they did in life, and that is what they would do in death if such a thing were possible. They fought for each other, for their family, for their land. They built something that lasted, something that mattered. They loved each other with a fierce devotion that never wavered, never dimmed, never failed. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that? To love and be loved, to fight for what is right, to build something that outlasts you, to face the world with someone beside you who will never let you fall. That was the gift Beatrice and Dominic gave each other. That was the legacy they left behind. And that was why their story, more than a century later, still had the power to move people, to inspire them, to remind them that true love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about standing beside someone when times are hard, about fighting together for what matters, about building a life one day at a time with patience and care and unwavering commitment. The sun sets over the Morgan Ranch, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, just as it has every evening for more than 150 years. The cattle settle for the night. The horses whinny softly in the barn. And somewhere, in memory or imagination or something deeper, a woman and a cowboy sit together on a porch, watching the day end and the stars appear, still together, still in love, still standing side by side just as they always did. Their story is complete. Their ending is happy. Their love endures. And that, in the end, is all that really matters.